Hello friends, I am Dr. Sandeep Prakash Joshi, Head of the Postgraduate University Department of English. I welcome you all to the Virtual Center from Campus to College and Community channel, Virtual C4, where we have organized for you a web lecture series on the theme of COVID-19 pandemic and related aspects. Friends, the COVID-19 pandemic has overtaken the world with overwhelming rapidity and force and has influenced millions of lives across the globe. It has created huge impact on the world economy and has affected lives in all sections of society, irrespective of race, religion, class, gender, and age. The viral assault has been so massive and so sudden that we have been caught unawares and unprepared and have found ourselves gasping for breath, quite literally. We have yet not fully come to terms with the nature and far-reaching effects it has caused on our day-to-day life. It has given rise to several issues of grave concern and consequences. And even as we remain clueless as to its nature and impact on the future of humanity, the onslaught of the infection is continually worsening with every passing day. In such a scenario, where we have been rendered almost defenseless with no vaccine or efficacious medicine still available, knowledge alone can help us to ensure our safety and survival. Hence, under the inspiration and encouragement of our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Dr. Muralidhar Sandekar, we have taken this initiative to enlighten the society through our channel, where intellectuals and scholars from different fields share their knowledge and understanding and help us to brace ourselves against this COVID scourge. So today we have as our distinguished guest, Dr. Nitin Patil, who would be enlightening us with his talk titled, Our World in the Time of Pandemic. Before I invite Dr. Nitin Patil, let me introduce him to you. Professor Nitin Patil is a faculty at Pratap College, Amarner since 2008, the same college where he has completed his undergraduate and postgraduate studies. Presently, he is pursuing his doctoral degree from the illustrated Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. Professor Patil is a visiting fellow at School of Criticism and Theory, Cornell University, USA. He is a noted speaker and has addressed as a keynote speaker in many national and international conferences. He has published many research articles in many reputed national and international journals. Today, he will speak on our world in the time of pandemic. To you, Dr. Nitin Patil, Professor Nitin Patil.
Thank you, Dr. Joshi, for this extremely generous introduction, and thank you very much for this invitation to give this talk in your web series which you have organized in the wake of this pandemic. As Dr. Joshi has already told us that this particular web series has been going on, and they've invited quite a few number of experts from all kinds of fields to come and talk to the future audience, because I think these lectures are being recorded and they would be relayed at some point in time, and so to this future audience. So the title of the talk which I am going to give today is Our World in the Time of Pandemic. Friends, I am a humanities teacher. I teach literature, and that is why I am going to look at...
Hello.
Yes. Hello. Hello. Yes. So I'm going to look at this whole scenario from the perspective of a humanities teacher, and that is why my way of looking at this present crisis is from a humanist point of view. I'd be looking at the dimensions of the various dimensions of this crisis, which is unfolding very rapidly in front of us, and as we are in the middle of this crisis, and the ramifications of which are still yet to unfold in its to its fullest, and that is why I am trying to read this crisis as best as I can, and let us try to make sense of what kind of world it has, it has created, what kind of situation it has created, before us. So, dear friends, before I formally begin with this lecture of this talk, let me tell you a very interesting story. When I teach in Pratap College, Amalner, which incidentally is completing 75th year of its inception today, and we are an autonomous college now. And so, in the month of December, or maybe in the month of November 2019, we were discussing the syllabus for the next academic year. And as I teach English, so we were discussing the syllabus for compulsory English, where we have to prescribe certain number of stories, short stories, certain number of poems, certain number of prose fiction. And so we were coming up with the titles which are to be included in the syllabus. And I, for one, thought that maybe in prose fiction I should prescribe, or we should prescribe, something which is really talking about the current world scenario. And I tried to prescribe a section from a very famous book. Now it's a very famous book today. The title of that book is Homo Deus. It's written by Yuval Harari. And I wanted to prescribe a section from that book, and I zeroed in on a section from the introduction called The Last Days of Death. And this could not be far away from the truth. I mean, this is when in the hindsight I look at my selection, I feel that pain which I think that nature has once again shown us that howsoever we may brag about our scientific achievements, and howsoever we brag about our technical achievements, nature still holds the sway, nature still dictates the terms. So, dear friends, I've divided this talk into certain sections. So the first part of my talk deals with, what this pandemic has done to our world. So I would start with the slightly innocuous looking thing, and I would tell you that it has busted some myths, the myths which we were leading by, the myths which we had taken for granted, the assumptions which we had taken for granted, that these are the things which are going to happen and we are in absolute control of the things. So the first myth, which this pandemic has busted is, I've already hinted at that, and that was the myth of Homo Deus. Now, first of all, I mean, as this lecture is going to be relayed in future, so I don't know about the audience, so I shall be taking into account certain things and certain aspects. So Homo Deus, maybe not many people know it. I don't want to insult your intelligence, but as I am not sure about my audience, so I'm going to explain certain things as well. So the first myth which this pandemic has busted is the myth of Homo Deus. Now, what exactly is Homo Deus? Homo Deus, as I've already told you, is a very famous book written by Yuval Harari. Harari is an intellectual guru, is the intellectual superstar of contemporary world, who became very famous with publication of two books. He teaches history, I think at Tel Aviv University, but he's become very famous for two books. The first book was Sapien, and the second book was Homo Deus. Now, the first book, Sapien, talks about the evolution of human being right from days immemorial to the state of, let us say, civilization and society. The second book, which is actually a sequel to the first one, is a book about 20th century and what kind of technological, scientific progress which we have made, and how it has transformed our lives, and how it has transformed the very notion of what it means to be a human being in 21st century. So the book is titled as Homo Deus. This is a Latin word which means, we have human God. So what Harari is trying to tell us in that book is that basically, we who came from the apes now are almost in the position of gods, and the section which I was talking about, which I was going to prescribe, which we are going to prescribe in our the section which we are going to prescribe is titled as the last days of death. So what Harari is trying to tell us in that book, which many people had agreed before the outbreak of this pandemic, that now human beings have come to such a stage where they can actually lengthen their life spans. Lengthen their lifespan means just like, the metaphor which he uses is like a car. You use a car, after some time you think that the car is falling apart, so you go to a workshop and you overhaul the entire car and you make it brand new. So Harari was of the opinion, or is of the opinion, that maybe we are in such a position that maybe when our body will start crumbling away, we'll go to clinic, and we will once again rejuvenate in the literal sense of the term. That is what Harari told us, and that is what the picture was actually looking like. But this pandemic has once again humbled us. A small virus which originated in a smaller, in one particular corner of the world, spreads all over the world, and it has almost humbled all the superpowers, all the technological innovations, all the scientific progress which we were boasting about. It has certainly humbled us. Even the superpowers like the Western countries cannot fully control this pandemic. They cannot fully, let us say, take care of what is happening to their population. So this is the first myth which it has busted. We human beings usually actually brag about this. I'm reminded of a very famous passage from the Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata, we all know that when the Pandavas, they go to a jungle because they've lost the bet with Kauravas, and so they are sitting in a jungle, and suddenly Dharmaraj Yudhishthir feels very thirsty, and that is why he sends his young siblings to bring water, and they don't come. And so one by one, all the Pandavas, they go and they don't return. So it is Yudhishthir at the last who goes to find out as to what has gone wrong. And when he goes, he comes across a lake. And he doesn't find any of his siblings, and so when he decides to drink water from the lake, suddenly a Gandharva appears there, a demigod appears there, and he says that this is my lake, and how come you have disturbed the sanctity of this lake? Your brothers tried to do it, and that's why I've killed them all. And so Yudhishthir apologizes, and he says that no, we're sorry and everything. And so the Yaksha, that demigod, actually asks him to answer certain questions for him, which are famously called as the Yaksha Prisoner in the Mahabharata, the questions of God. And we all have read about it, but we don't know what those questions exactly were. There are all kinds of questions, but one question which really interests me is when Yaksha, the demigod, asks Dharmaraj, which is the biggest irony of the world, and then Dharmaraj answers. He says that every day thousands and thousands of people die, but we live as if nothing is going to happen to us, as if we are immortals. So I think we human beings in the 21st century, we the citizens of any society in the world, we were living in that zone, that complacent zone, where we thought that we have conquered everything, and we have almost turned into gods. And that is why Harari, take him very seriously. He's a very serious scholar, and that's why, he came up with that book, and which we all believed in. It's not a myth created by Harari. It's a myth created by the entire human race, that we are almost godlike. But a small virus has humbled us. It has made us think about our mortality and so many things. So it has busted that particular myth, and busted it in a very terrible way. The second thing which I want to talk about is the second myth is the myth of capitalism. We human beings, we have organized our economic affairs in a particular way, and we know that after the collapse of Soviet Union, that is in 1990, I hope all of us remember that famous book now, very important book. You may have problems with that book, but the book was very important. It was written by Francis Fukuyama, where he said that now market economy and liberal democracy, this is going to be the way of life. The title of that book was End of History and the Last Man. So collapse of the Soviet Union and the Second World almost brought that lesson to us, that it is the end of history. End of history doesn't mean end of a particular discipline. It means that, history in Hegelian sense of the term. Hegel always thought that human race is evolving politically, socially, and culturally. And this socio-political cultural evolution is called as history. And so Fukuyama, after that monumental event of the collapse of the Soviet Union, brought this insight, out, that it is the end of history. Now human beings have achieved a kind of supreme status where there are no alternatives to ways of life. Market economy and liberal democracy is here, and is here to stay and stay forever. Now, if you look at the scenario of the outbreak of the sheer numbers of fatality, deaths which are occurring everywhere, you would see that the worst hit area, is the Western world. And Western world is the world which has adopted capitalism. It is the capitalist way of life, capitalistic economic system. But this system, because it gives, the ownership is in the private hands. Even healthcare and such important issues are handled by the private players. There you would see that, be it Italy, be it Spain, be it the United States of America, the United Kingdom, you would see that everywhere it has wreaked havoc. And no society, no health system it unfortunately has been able to cope up with the enormity of this particular thing. So capitalism was also thought as the economic system, and it was thought that this is the way everybody has to organize the economic affairs of the society. But even that myth was busted by this particular pandemic. Now, as in the beginning of this lecture, I told you that there might have been people who have spoken about other aspects of the pandemic, but as being the teacher of humanities, I'm going to concentrate on the ramifications, the implications of this pandemic in terms which are related to human beings as such. So these are the two myths which we had completely believed in. These two myths: one, that human being has almost achieved godlike status because of its technological, scientific achievements. This was myth number one. Second myth, when it comes to economy, was that the capitalism is the panacea for all economic ills of the society. In fact, capitalism will solve each and every problem. Both these myths have been completely destroyed by this pandemic, as I have already told you. Now, this is one thing, and when you look at the kind of coverage this pandemic is getting, especially in the first and second phase of this pandemic, people started romanticizing so many things. The air became cleaner, the pollution was gone, animals roaming freely, and everything. I mean, of course, we should crave for pollution-free environment. We should care for animal rights and everything, but let us not romanticize this. Let us look at the kind of challenges it has thrown in our face. Unless and until we look at these challenges in realistic terms, we won't be able to we won't be able to frame any strategy as such to deal with this kind of pandemic right now and even in the future. And we don't know as yet whether there are going to be waves of this pandemic. Maybe we are in the first wave. Maybe there will be a second wave. There will be third wave. But that will be something which the epidemiologist and the medical fraternity will take care of. Now, the second part of this talk, I would like to focus on what this pandemic has done to us culturally, politically, in geopolitical sense of the term. So I would say that this pandemic has brought out certain fault lines which were all the time present in our societies, but which we had not taken care of, or which we which we had actually pushed aside, which we kind of thought that do not exist, but they exist, and they have come back in a very strong way. So my this particular part of this talk, I will talk about what kind of fault lines have once again surfaced. What kind of problems of the world which we had almost thought that do not exist have come back to haunt us. Now, the first of these fault lines which I notice, or which I am aware of, is the failure of global institutions. Global institutions such as the United Nations, World Health Organizations, and their various organs. That's number one. And secondly is that the failure of other institutions such as the state, such as the society. Even these institutions do not seem to do that well, in during this particular crisis. Now, the first, let us look at the global institutions. Now, when I say global institutions, I mean the United Nations, and especially the World Health Organization. Now, these two organizations, especially the World Health Organization, is supposed to take care of all these kind of calamities which the world is going to face, which it has been doing. Now, please remember, let us remind ourselves one particular thing, that these global institutions were not there right from the word go. These global institutions were created because we had certain calamities in the past, and that is why these calamities should not repeat, or the humanity should not pay this kind of price once again, in terms of economy, in terms of human life, in terms of cultural harmony and such things. We came up with this kind of institutions. We all know that when the World War First was over, League of Nations was established. League of Nations was not able to deliver. That is why Second World War took place, and that is why United Nations came up. And even WHO, because there are countries in the world which are not equipped with the kind of medical know-how, medical facilities, and that is why these institutions were created. Now, if you look at these two institutions, what have they done? Let us look at WHO. Now, this particular virus broke out in the month of December. I mean, if I've been following it from December. The virus breaks out in December, and then the responsibility of the WHO is to report it to the and supervise it, conduct necessary research, come up with the kind of strategy which is required. But what has WHO done? Now, if you look at their official Twitter handle carefully, and if you look at their policy, they've done very badly. I mean, it's almost defunct kind of let us say institution, because when the virus when the virus broke out, they had their team in Wuhan, and there is that unfortunate tweet which the World Health Organization came out on 12th of January, where they said that there is a new virus, but the human-to-human transmission is not possible. Now, by that time, Wuhan had completely been decimated by this virus. There were cases. Now, if human-to-human transmission was not possible, how come there were so many casualties, and how come there were so many cases which are taking place in Wuhan? And in fact, Dr. Tedros, who's the head of WHO, who had visited China, who had visited Wuhan during that time, he actually praised China regarding their effects, and regarding their efforts, I should say, which they were taking in order to contain this epidemic. But the world at large was not informed, and that is why flights were moving in and out of Wuhan. And this is how the virus spread. Now, tell me one thing, we as human race had gone through some terrible crisis, and that is why we came up with this kind of global institutions. And these global institutions are considered, I mean, they are supposed to deliver in this, in the time, in these trying times. But the WHO has completely failed the world. Now, why it did so, how WHO has come to such a state, that is something for the strategic experts and the economists of the world to think about and talk about. The second thing is United Nations. Now, what is United Nations doing? Do you think that it's doing anything? I mean, basically what we had thought, that there would be a collaborative global effort which will be supervised, which will be conducted by the United Nations to find out the cure for this particular epidemic. But the United Nations is hardly doing anything. So this pandemic has brought to our notice that these global institutions which we have created with vision, created with cooperation, they have almost become defunct. They were not, it's very easy to say that it has caught us unawares. It's not as if that WHO is not accustomed to such outbreaks. There have been some outbreaks. SARS was one, Ebola was the other, Nipah was the third one, and there are so many other outbreaks which the WHO was able to contain. Now, how come that a particular outbreak which started in China, how come they were not able to contain it? Now, this is something which the world has to think very seriously about. This is something which we have to really ponder over, so that this kind of problems don't appear in future. Now let us come back to the other part of this failure. The human beings, in order to live good life, in order to create a better world, have created certain institutions like the state. Now the state as an institution is in the service of the citizens. Yesterday I was reading Huffington Post, where an American citizen had written a vehement critique of American administration, where he said that we pay our taxes, we do this and we do that, we follow this kind of rules and regulations, and what the state has given us in written, the state has failed us. And in fact that that particular author had gone to an extent of saying that American state is a failed state. Now, people who know little bit of political theory, they know the enormity of this concept of failed state. A state is a failed state when it is not able to deliver, when it is not able to do its duties. That particular state is called as a failed state. Now, calling the United States of America as a failed state is a big thing. And please remember one thing, this is the outcry of the citizens. And we have to take into account the largest fatality number is in the United States. New York, a city like New York has turned into almost a place where people are dying like anything, and it looks as if nobody is in charge there. Now, in case of this particular pandemic, there are no clear-cut winners and there are no clear-cut losers. I mean, almost all the governments have done very badly, especially the Western, in the Western part of the world. We can give them the benefit of doubt, saying that this is a new virus and the world was not ready, nobody is ready. But given the kind of technological might they have, given the kind of scientific prowess they have, the kind of infrastructure they have done very badly. On the other hand, a country like India has done reasonably well. In fact, there are certain states where they've been able to contain this pandemic in a very effective manner. For example, Tamil Nadu is doing really well. Kerala did extremely well. And that is why, we can see that on global level, most of these states are failing to discharge their duties. And now I think the time has come to renegotiate the social contract theory. So this is another thing which we need to take into account. there is something called as international civil society. Now, international national civil society is, these are the bodies which really take care of human rights and other things, because they believe that sometimes you cannot trust certain states. It's true that there are certain states in the world, which are completely run by authoritarian regimes and which are not democratic in the true sense of the term. That is why, in order to safeguard the rights of human beings, you need international civil society. But do you find Red Cross anywhere? Do you find CARE anywhere? So there's even this international civil society is failing us. It has not been able to come up with any kind of strategy so that we'll be able to contain this particular pandemic. And the example in this connection is the crisis of Rohingyas, as I hope we all are aware of that. Rohingyas are that unfortunate group of people who were living in Myanmar, but now Myanmar has driven them out. Bangladesh has accepted some of them. India doesn't want them. All the neighboring countries do not want them, and that is why they are called as the boat people. Now, they had some kind of temporary camps where these Rohingyas, refugees, were living. But now, as the epidemic broke out, all the international civil society, Red Cross, CARE, all of them have left them. And now these refugees, these these refugees are completely on their own, and that is why we have to take this into account as well. So this pandemic has actually brought in so many fault lines of our society that it's horrible. When we look at this kind of things, then we look at uh, the stories of failure everywhere. Another aspect which I would like to talk about is that humanity hasn't gone through crisis for the first time. This is not for the first time. Humanity has been through many, 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 many crises through the annals of history. But one silver lining in every dark cloud was the leadership, the role of leadership. For example, First World War, Second World War, and other economic crises or other humanitarian crises were there. But every time the global leadership would rise to the occasion. Unfortunately, this time around, you don't see any nation state or any leader of the world rising to the occasion. All they are concerned about is saving their own political constituencies. I'm not even saying that they are trying to save their own population. They are trying to save their political constituencies. For example, the biggest superpower of the world undoubtedly is the United States of America. Now, the president of the United States of America is not worried about saving the population. He's more worried about the coming election in the November. And that is why instead of dealing with this crisis in a matured way, what is he doing? He's calling it the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, as if he's shifting the blame on some particular country, thereby absolving himself of all kinds of responsibility. Now, this is happening in the case of United States of America. Now, why am I talking about the United States of America again and again? Whether one likes it or not, it is the superpower of the world, and it can, and it has a major role to play in each and every tragedy, or in each and every crisis which the world goes through. And in the past it had done so. Be it the depression of 1929, be it the First World War, be it the Second World War. But this time around, you don't see anything. All you can see is the rise of authoritarianism all over the world. So this is another problem, the failure of the leadership to rise to the occasion. And unfortunately, this is very disheartening, because uh, crisis will come and go, but we as human race have stood up to the occasion, has risen to the occasion because of our leaders, because leaders are supposed to represent they are supposed to be the embodiments of the aspirations of the populations they represent. But unfortunately, this time around, the failure of leadership is so stark, and it is so distressing that we really think that this crisis is compounded because of the lack of leadership which we see. Now, another fault line which has come and which has which has struck us very hard is the rise of jingoism. Nationalism is a good thing, because nationalism is that ideology which gives you a sense of belonging and a sense of sharing with other members of your group, and it kind of inculcates the thought of collectivity, the betterment of collectivity in your mind. But when nationalism crosses its limits, it turns into jingoism. Now, one of the fault lines which this pandemic unfortunately has underlined is the rise of jingoism, is the rise of ultra-nationalism almost all over the world. Let us take example of two big powers in the world. One is the United States of America, the other is China. And in case of China, I have my own experience to tell you. When the pandemic broke out, and Dr. Joshi in his introduction told you that I was in the United States of America. I was a visiting fellow at School of Criticism and Theory at Cornell University, and it had invited people from all over the world. And I have a friend from China who had come there, and we met and we became good friends. So when the crisis was going on in the month of January, I messaged him, and I out of care and concern, I asked him whether how is he doing, is everybody safe, and this and that. And then he said, okay. He actually, Chinese, they have to be very circumspect because they are all the time supervised. So my friend told me that yes, everything is fine, and government is taking good care, this and that. And then the conversation between him and I began, and by that time the Americans had started calling it the Chinese virus or the Wuhan virus. Now this is very, very unfortunate, because a virus may originate anywhere, but when you give this kind of title, when you use this kind of derogatory term, you are actually attributing the problem of that outbreak or of that calamity to a particular section of people. And so I messaged him and I said that I'm really sorry that the Americans are calling it the Wuhan virus or the China virus and things like that. So I was expecting that he would say, thank you, dear friend, that you are of this opinion, and this is not just the Chinese problem, but this is the problem of the entire world. So I was expecting that kind of response, and what I got instead, he sent me couple of posts. In fact, couple of would be an understatement. A barrage of posts which were doing rounds in the Chinese social media, whereby they said that the American army had been to Wuhan, and it is the the American army, to be precise, who have actually spread this virus. Now, this is laughable. You say that one superpower says that it is China's doing, and China says that it is the Americans doing. So instead of owning up the responsibility and rising to the occasion, this blame game. Now, why are they playing this kind of a blame game? Now, we all know about China. It's an authoritarian state, unfortunately. And when that famous doctor who actually came up with this information that there is a new virus and which is causing pneumonia, and when he started writing to the health officials, he was imprisoned, and he was imprisoned with the charges of spreading rumors and being anti-national. And he was the one who actually blew the whistle. He was the whistleblower. And look at this, can only happen in China. This man was imprisoned. Later on, China accepted that there is new virus. This man was released and he died because of the coronavirus infection. And later on, the highest civilian award, which is given to the Chinese, any Chinese citizen, was given to him. So right from a social outcast to the national hero. Now, governments can behave like that. All the politicians are what? I mean, they are short-term maximizers. had China been able to contain the virus right in the beginning, that man would not have been awarded with that, civilian award. So now, naturally, this kind of a blame game which is going on, the occasion demands that you own up the responsibility and you really start working together. I mean, all societies. It is not just the problem of China. It is the problem of all the, all the countries which are there. Now, look at this. I mean, so China, by whipping up the frenzy of nationalism, is trying to it is trying to drive away the attention of the Chinese population from the failure of the Chinese state. So exactly the same phenomenon is taking place in the United States of America. The American administration says WHO is to be blamed, China is to be blamed, China says that America is to be blamed, and for the first time, some of my friends in China tell me that people are not happy with the Chinese administration. And mind you, in China, to express one's dissatisfaction with the government is a huge political risk, but people are taking that risk. There was a scathing article on Xi Jinping, the president of the Chinese president, which was later on taken down. So now this entire exercise between India and China, now why is suddenly China, why has China taken this, all of a sudden a very aggressive posture on our borderline? Because, it one way or the other wants to it wants to take that attention of the population from the failure of state to to the border issue, and saying that, see, the Indians are encroaching on our territory. Samuel, who was he? I mean, Dr. Samuel Johnson, perhaps, who said that the nationalism is the last resort of the scoundrels. And so this is how they are, in order to diverge the attention of the people from this kind of failure, is, in order to do that, they are whipping up the frenzy of nationalism. China has always done that. In 1962, why did China all of a sudden attack India? One of the reasons which is given is that Mao Zedong's personal program called, that it was his personal dream, but that horrible program called as the Cultural Revolution had gone completely wrong. It had decimated the Chinese society. Millions and millions people had died, and that is why, in order to divert attention from that front, he had declared war on India. And now exactly that is what the Chinese are doing. That is what the United States of America is doing. So they are whipping up the frenzy of nationalism so that people's attention we can be diverted. So this rise of excessive nationalism, this rise of excessive Jingoism is another fault line which this particular pandemic has brought in. It has brought in. Now, so far, I've talked about. I've talked about two things. I talked about the busting of the myths by which we were living and organizing our lives. And secondly, I talked about certain fault lines which this pandemic has actually brought to our notice. These fault lines were all the time present in our society, but these fault lines, they've resurfaced because of this particular crisis. Now, people always ask this question: what kind of world it is going to be? Now, please remember one thing, before I move on to the next part, let me talk a little bit about one particular thing. Now, even in India, we have started celebrating. There are so many, what should I say, commando comic channels, news channels, where we have started celebrating that now nobody is going to believe China, and that is why all the industry is going to shift to India, and India will be the next superpower. Now, this is unfortunate. This is not how capitalism works, or this is not how the international relations develop and international relations pan out. So that is, even we are guilty of this kind of, self-praise and this and that. There are so many problems at hand. Chinese may have played their part in this crisis, but let us remember one thing, that they came out, if I believe, and if we believe in what the Chinese are saying, that then they were the first society to come out of this COVID crisis. So this is another thing which we need to take into account. Now, what kind of possibilities, what will be the outcomes of this crisis in geopolitical terms, in social terms, in cultural terms? What kind of outcomes do we envisage? So I would say that, the kind of world which we will inherit or which we will inhabit after this crisis will be a smaller and meaner world. Now, what do I mean by smaller and meaner world? Now, by smaller, I mean the world is not going to squeeze in size. I would say that the global outlook as such will take a retreat, and it will be a meaner world, because now the societies will not open up to other societies. For example, globalization was a wonderful thing to happen to the world, whereby cultures, ideas, economy could actually move from one place to the other. And it was supposed that it was considered that it will be a globally connected world, and the nation states or the nationalism will slowly fade away. But unfortunately, that is not going to happen pretty soon. Now, societies will take great deal of caution before opening up to people from other countries, because the health argument will come up again and again and again. For example, if you want to go to the United States of America and start some business there, or you want to go there for some reasons, there will be strong restrictions, stringent restrictions, I should say, on the grounds of health. So the kind of world which we are going to inherit or inhabit, I should say, will be a much smaller and much meaner world. And you would see that because of this, there will be the rise of authoritarian politics, and there will be rise in identity politics. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is a very simple thing. See, greed, fear, and violence are basic human emotions to my mind, unfortunately. And political leadership, as I told you in when I was making the last point, they are short-term maximizers. They actually they always care about the political gains they can have. So already there is tremendous amount of fear. There is tremendous amount of suspicions about one another, and the political forces which thrive on this kind of insecurity are usually the authoritarian, identitarian politicians, and they are going to cash in on this kind of fear and suspicion. And that is why that opened world, that globalized world, I believe, is almost gone. I mean, I don't say, I'm not going to write it off completely. It may be once again a better world and a globalized world, but at least in near future, you will see that this is going to be a much more closed world, where societies would be scared of one another, would be suspicious of one another. People will be, they will be suspected of carrying this kind of deadly viruses with them. So that is another problem with this thing. And this particular crisis has once again brought in another thing into our notice, is that there are some very unfortunate sections of the human societies which were badly hurt all over the world. And I call them, these new unfortunate sections, the bottom structure of our societies is the new subaltern. I hope I'll explain, which is subaltern is the term which is coined by Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was a very famous Italian thinker, and he said, he was when he talked about society, he said that there is a section of particular society which is at the bottom, and which is not taken care of by the society, or sorry, the state, which is not taken care of by the government machinery. And he called these disenfranchised people as the subalterns. A subaltern is someone who cannot attain the state. ATTAIN, cannot attain the state. They are not on the radar. So when you look at this crisis, you would see that a new subaltern has come to our notice. You would see the migrant workers in India, the black people in the United States of America, the poor sections living in Wuhan, the Rohingyas, in Myanmar and other places. These are the people, who were worst hit, by this pandemic. Now, you and me, Dr. Joshi, me and people like us who are middle class people, we are safe. We are masked, we have gloves. The government has certain policies for us. We can stay at home, read books, give lectures. We are privileged. But what about those people, especially people, say, let us say, living in Mumbai, migrant workers? We saw harrowing plight of these migrant workers who had to walk on foot, and people literally died on the roads and nothing was done. And this is not just an Indian phenomenon. This has happened everywhere. And look at how ignorant the political leadership is. I'll give you a terrible example. We all know about that girl from Darbhanga who cycled all the way from New Delhi to Darbhanga, some 1,000+ kilometers. She carried her father on bicycle and she rode all the way there. And, when this news broke out, the daughter of the president of United States of America, Miss Trump, she said that this is an amazing gymnastic achievement. She should be looked after, and this particular this girl should be taken under the wings of some sports authority. Now, someone should tell this Miss Trump that the girl did not ride all the way in order to show her physical prowess or to show her cycling skills. It was the matter of survival for her. It was the matter of life and death for her. It reminds me of that apocryphal story in France, when the French Revolution was about to break out, when poor people did not have anything to eat, they took out a procession, and their demand was, we want bread, we want bread. And, the queen of Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, she callously said that if these people cannot eat bread, why don't they eat cake instead? So it is that kind of mentality which we have seen all over the world. And that is why this is an unfortunate thing. This new subaltern, this new disenfranchised people, they are the worst hit. And somebody really needs to take up this study. Look at the number of people. I'm not saying that the rich people have not died, but look at the kind of opportunities they had, the kind of health facilities they had, and the kind of plight which these underprivileged, disenfranchised people had to go through. And that is why this is something which we need to take into account. This is the underbelly of almost each and every human society, which we should be aware of. Now, so far, I have painted the picture in a very bleak way. I talked about what has gone wrong, and you might believe that everything is wrong with the world and this man doesn't see any ray of hope. But let me tell you one thing, every crisis is an opportunity. So there is an opportunity here. And now what exactly is that opportunity? So that opportunity for me is very simple: renegotiating social contract. Now, what do I mean by this? Social contract means, when societies came into existence, they needed to have certain organs of that society. For example, family, for example, government, this and that. And that is why they created governments. And they would pay their taxes to the government, and in return, government would take care of them, as the state would, take care of them. This is called as social contract theory. Now, there is a time now we all have realized how states are failing, how political leadership is failing us. And that is why I expect, because see, there is this catch. Political leadership does not pay attention to many things. But let me tell you one thing, that political leadership is also pretty practical. That if we people believe in certain constitutional values such as equality, values such as accountability on the part of government, values such as better health facilities for everybody, if we believe in certain principles, and if we say that anybody who's going to deliver on this, we will vote for that person, or we will vote for that particular government. And let me tell you one thing, all these political parties will start coming out with their agendas, and they will at least say that this is what their priority is going to be. So this crisis has actually given us an opportunity to look at this particular aspect of social contract theory. If all over the world we come together, and we as in we as in people, common people, and if we could come up with this kind of organizations which will believe in all these constitutional values, as I've already told you, redistribution of wealth, redistribution of health facilities, equality on each and every ground, accountability, greater accountability on the part of the governments, then we will be able to dictate terms to this political community, and they will have to fall in line if they want our votes. So it's not as if that it is just a crisis. Every crisis is an opportunity. So if we could practice this kind of constitutional values, if we could organize people on and around the principles of this kind of constitutional values, the political constituency will have to pay heed, because they want to be in power, and they will. It's like television, if you don't watch nonsense on television, the television people will start giving you the quality stuff. But if you believe, if you enjoy the nonsense, then they will just give you the nonsensical stuff. So we as citizens, and that is why the challenge before us is to to actually bring out that notion of citizen, citizen endowed with certain human rights, and citizen in whose service the state and the international community should be. If we could revive that notion, and if we could revive that notion politically, then certainly we will be able to create a kind of awareness amongst people, and awareness and demand on the political class to be more accountable to us. Then certainly we will be able to create a world where this kind of crisis can certainly be taken care of, where it will not be allowed to blow out of proportion. So this is what I wanted to say. I don't know who my audience is going to be, so I thank the audience who's going to listen to this lecture, and I request the organizers that they should actually publish the phone numbers or the email IDs of the resource persons, so that the conversation of some sort or some kind will begin after the relaying of this kind of lectures. I thank Dr. Joshi, I thank the organizers, I thank Mr. Ingre, who's handling this entire thing from the technology point of view. So I thank everybody. Thank you so much.
So thank you so much, Dr. Nitin Patil. It was a wonderful lecture, and your lecture has reminded me of those prophetic lines by the Nobel laureate W.B. Yeats. The lines are, "Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand." Definitely, sir, the time of crisis brings forth the true test of humanity. It's a time of displaying unity and solidarity. A society and a nation gets weakened if it is fractured through petty politics. Hopefully, the COVID-19 calamity will unite us and bring the best out of us in terms of empathy, compassion, brotherhood. Those famous lines I'm reminded of from Urdu Shairi, "Malik ne to bakhshi thi hame ek hi dharti, हमने उसे कहीं चीन कहीं जापान बनाया." So, well, so I thank Professor Nitin Patil once again for accepting our invitation and delivering a wonderful lecture. I also thank technical team, Gaurav Ingre and others, and members of the VC4 channel committee for their immense help and cooperation. I also thank the audience for their keen participation. Thank you all. Have a nice day.